evaluation includes measurement and assessment, I will use the term assessment to refer evaluation in this class. The main role of teacher is to carry on teaching learning process in the direction of total development of the learner. In addition to this, teachers should carry on with assessment to determine the effectiveness of teaching learning process and their internalization by learners irrespective of their abilities and disabilities. They have to assess to what extent the fixed objectives has been fulfilled, and also we will see how far the learning experiences provided by them have been appropriate and useful. Thus, like transaction of knowledge, testing students play a vital part in educational process. Evaluating students with visual impairment is a complex and multifaceted process of gathering information using appropriate tools and techniques. Like teaching, evaluating visually impaired students is also considered to be a most challenging task. Visually impaired students have difficulties with visual perception, limited spatial awareness and visual stimulation. This will be challenging to teachers to prepare formal test items that are accessible to them. So, informal evaluation should be considered as an essential supplement to use along with formal measures and instruments. Evaluating visually impaired students will help us to know not only their abilities, but also enables us to identify their specific needs related to accessing the general curriculum. Scholastic assessment reflects upon child's ability to relate subject knowledge to the present day and future needs. It is based on how much the child has been able to integrate the knowledge of various subjects like languages, maths, science and social sciences, which may be commonly termed as educational assessment. It includes assessing the learner's knowledge, understanding, application, evaluation, analysis and creativity in subjects and the ability to apply it in unfamiliar situations. In addition to these scholastic assessment, assessing reading, writing, listening and speech will contribute to students' progress in curricular areas. In mathematics, students should be assessed by their ability to think and reason, to visualize and handle abstractions, to formulate and solve problems. As mathematics is an abstract subject, evaluating math ability in visually impaired students is quite a challenging task on part of teachers. The major challenges in preparing accessible math test items to visually impaired students includes non-availability of sufficient resources like abacus, tailor frame, mathematical braille materials and graphical tools. Lack of training of teachers in preparing math test items using math braille codes, that is Nimath braille codes. Lack of knowledge among teachers and students in using Nimath braille codes. For visually impaired students, the test administered to other students must be adapted to make it accessible. This may sometimes take away the validity of test. The appropriateness of a test given to students with visual impairment is dependent not only on the ability to adapt test, but also on its characteristics. It includes adapting a written test into a large print, braille or audio format. All these adaptations makes a test accessible. In specific cases, a similar question needs to be developed that measure same skill as of original item. If an item is complex and cannot be adapted, it should be omitted and scoring of the test need to be modified. Assessment should judge a student's ability to express oneself in different forms. For this, visually impaired students can make use of various accommodations while taking tests. Accommodations are changes in the way that an assessment is administered that do not affect the validity of results. By compensating for challenges in the accessibility of test items, we can help students with visual impairment to demonstrate knowledge and skills on an equal footing with regular students. For example, assistive technology is considered as an accommodation to test students with visual impairment. It provides learners with visual impairment to access academic instruction and tests. Teachers can make use of accommodations during both formative and summative assessments. They should evaluate effectiveness of various accommodations for an individual student. Accommodations used during testing should generally match those used by the student for classroom instructions. Further, students must be trained to use accommodations. For example, providing a test orally or on computer might actually penalize a student who has not been trained to listen orally presented material or trained to use a computer for assessment. Accommodation should be periodically evaluated to ensure their effectiveness for the student. Some may need to be eliminated or revised based on the student requirements and their ability to use it. Now, let us discuss presentation, response, setting and timing accommodations for visually impaired students to take tests. Presentation accommodation uses materials or tools to administer assessment. Here, test items are changed to a format that are accessible by visually impaired student. Braille, large print and audio are examples of presentation accommodations. For example, a student may read a passage in Braille and prefer to access a table or chart in an enlarged version of the text. Therefore, students should be allowed to use a large print and a Braille version of the test if requested. Computer administered testing is also a presentation accommodation that includes several programs and peripheral materials like screen readers, text to speech technology and keyboard access through Braille or switches. This can be used to adapt computer for use by students with visual impairment to take tests. When testing allows the use of non-scientific or scientific calculators, students with visual impairment should be permitted to use an equivalent device that has been adapted for use by a visually impaired user. Abacus is often useful for students when mathematical problems are to be worked without a calculator. The abacus functions as paper and pencil for students with visual impairment. Mathematics test items can be presented using Nemeth Braille codes. Test items in the form of diagrams can be presented using mathematic graphics. Manipulative devices such as ruler or template can be used to maintain placement on a line of Braille or print. Other tools available for use by visually impaired students include Braille or large print rulers and protractors, raised line or bold line graph paper and writing paper. Next is the response accommodation that permits visually impaired students to respond to assessment items in the way in which they can give their responses. Students with visual impairment may need to present answers orally to a scribe who completes the answer sheet. They may also need to write answers in the test booklet or on separate paper using a Braille writer or slate and stylus. The students' answers must then be transcribed and transferred to the answer sheet. Further, they can write answers using a word processing program which is then transferred to the answer sheet. If a student must draw a response, then accessible tools and materials that are used for instructional purposes must be made available in the testing environment. For this type of open response item, it is very important that scoring criteria be well defined and allowed for variation in response methods. The third accommodation is timing accommodation, where changes are made to the timing or scheduling of the assessment. The use of extended time for test completion has been followed by the majority of teachers across the country. Students with visual impairment will usually require extended time during testing because using Braille, print and audio formats require more time than does reading print with acceptable visual acuity. Reading Braille or listening to material presented orally, especially when accompanied by graphic material, can be a strenuous and often frustrating experience in testing environment for students with visual impairment. Therefore, students may need several brief sessions and break options to give their responses. Depending on the optional functioning time, students may be tested over a longer period time. They may also be tested at different times of the day. The fourth accommodation is setting accommodation. Here the changes are made to environment for taking test by visually impaired students. Some students with visual impairment may need to take separate tests individually or in small groups. This setting accommodation will ensure the smooth conduct of the test without interfering with the concentration and test taking of other students. For example, if visually impaired students is recording answers by using technology that is noisy or is recording answers orally, then they must take the test individually and under the supervision of teacher in order to avoid distracting or influencing the responses of other students. In addition to these presentation, response, timing and setting accommodations, we will now discuss some special tools accommodations that assist visually impaired to take tests. Since no single device would be exclusively useful for visually impaired students for their calculations in mathematics, it is quite reasonable to look into several other devices and materials that help teachers to evaluate math ability among visually impaired students. There are a number of special tools that students with visual impairment may need during the testing process. For example, the devices like talking calculators, braille or large print rulers, protractors and other measurement devices will be useful. Abacus is one of the special tools that can be used to perform addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, square and cube roots. Abacus functions as a paper and pencil for students with visual impairment. It also helps in solving complex mathematical problems. Like Abacus, we are also having Taylor mathematical slate, which is used to perform math calculations. It consists of an aluminum frame and a set of metal pegs with patterns. The frame has rows of opening, each set out as an 8-pointed star. The pegs could therefore be placed in the frame in one of 8 orientations, which could be used to present numbers, letters or signs. Nimeth Braille codes is a special math code for encoding mathematical and scientific notation by linearly using standard 6-dot Braille cells for tactile reading. The most obvious change is the use of the dropped or lower cell numerals rather than upper cell ones in depicting numbers. For example, shape indicator is depicted using 1, 2, 4 and 6th dots in Nimeth Braille code, followed by 2, 3, 4 and 5th dot for equilateral triangle. For students who are having low vision, needs magnification devices to access the print test items. Eyeglass mounted magnifiers, freestanding or handheld magnifiers and electronic equipment such as the closed circuit television or a computer that has text enlargement software installed are examples of magnification devices. In addition to the braille and large print version of the test items, audio version of test can also be used to provide assistance to the visually impaired students during exams. The use of audio version of the test items plays significant role when the teacher has difficulty in preparing math items using large print and tactile graphics. Audio formats include cassette tape, video, compact disc, computer based or spoken test versions. Audio tests can be packaged for each individual student with the appropriate print or braille supplements needed by the student. Also, teachers can improvise math teaching aids for evaluation purposes. For example, geometrical devices can be adapted and improvised to the evaluation needs of visually impaired children. For example, a student is expected to measure various angles with the use of protractor. In the normal protractor made out of plastic, big holes can be made for every 10 degrees and small holes for every 5 degrees without breaking it. A small needle can be used to grave such tiny holes. Similarly, many normal teaching aids can be improvised for the evaluation needs of visually impaired children. Likewise, math manipulatives can be used in the place of abstract test item involving any geometric diagrams. This will make the students to concretely understand the test item. In the same way, geoboard is a multipurpose board. It is a pegboard, square or rectangular in shape with nails at equal distance both lengthwise and widthwise. This is used to evaluate students' geometrical skills. For example, the ability of the visually impaired students in identifying the properties of the polygonal figures can be assessed using this board. The graphic tool enables the teacher to convert abstract visual math test items into non-visual math test items. Students can produce graphic information on a test using graphic tools. In addition to these, the special tools like line markers and templates are used to maintain placement on a line of braille or print. Along with this, tactile scales and wax pencils can be used to draw lines, whereas special papers are used by the visually impaired for constructing answers and producing graphs during exams. Also, scientific tables and log books in braille or large print edition are used to refer scientific and log values during exams. During exams, the visually impaired students' responses can be recorded using recording technologies. Recording of responses can be carried out using note taking by teachers, videotaping and tape recording. Without any doubt, computers play a significant role in aiding visually impaired students not only during instructional phase but also during exams. For example, computer programs like Job Access with Speech will help the visually impaired students to read back the online question paper. Other tools includes braille printers connected to computers and voice command programs that aid students having difficulty using keyboard. Along with the substitution of these accommodations to take tests, the tests formulated for the visually impaired students should be universally designed to ensure inclusiveness. Generally, the principles of universal design include paying attention to the inclusive assessment population. The second principle is providing accessible test items in various media like braille, tactile graphics, large print, regular print and audio, including non-biased test items, examining each test item for universal design principles, clearly specifying test formats, response options and scoring procedures, and recommending allowable accommodations for test administration. The teachers of visually impaired students should be clear about the test item specifications. This is essential in determining appropriate accommodation use and in the reproduction of test items to be presented in braille, tactile, large print or audio formats. Also, they should involve in proofreading the braille, large print or audio version of the test items. Further, the teacher should take care of the validity issues concerning all accessible formats and accommodation needs during test development. Specific guidelines related to test format changes, allowable accommodations and general assistance that can be provided to student must be stated in the test administration with justification by the teachers. Teachers also should curtail visually impaired students from using specialized tools and materials if their use presents an unfair advantage. Prior to testing, the teacher must ensure that the test is available in a student's primary reading medium or combination of media. Before exams, teachers also should inspect the functioning of accommodations and special tools. In Indian context, both students with visual impairment and their teachers face numerous challenges during evaluation process. The challenges ranges from constructing the test items to the exclusion of visual test items to the visually impaired students. However, teachers have to be reflective right from the instructional phase to the evaluative phase. We observe that there is no specific assessment techniques used to assess the visually impaired students. Teachers have to consider some of the viable techniques like observation, group discussions and portfolios to assess the visually impaired students. Along with the formal assessment techniques like paper and pencil test, informal techniques like observation and interview shall also be considered by teachers according to the specific assessment needs of the individual student. In order to plan for the educational assessment, teachers should consider the results of functional vision, learning media and orientation and mobility skills of the visually impaired students. Different approaches and tools available to evaluate the mathematical abilities in visually impaired students contribute to the creation of situational approaches, which either exist already or emerged as an outcome of the creativity of the teacher while producing and administering the math test items. Also, teachers have to be collaborative in nature with other paraprofessionals and parents of the visually impaired students to make the evaluation inclusive and accessible. Further, teachers should exhibit knowledge in various technologies and accommodations available to the visually impaired students during evaluation process. I hope this class have given you inputs and ideas regarding various accommodations one should consider for visually impaired students during exams. Thank you.